Welcome to the Me, You and Data podcast, the podcast that uncovers insights from leading data science and analytics professionals globally to enable you to grow your career, teams and business. I'm Joseph Carla, your host and founder at 633 who bring you this podcast. We hope you get value from this episode. Hello there everyone and welcome to another episode of Me, You and Data. I'm pleased to have someone who I've known for a very long time join the show today, and I know that she's going to offer and deliver great value. Her name's Amita Basu. She has got an extensive career in management consulting, holds an MBA, and has worked for some of the top consulting companies in the world, as well as, speaking several languages. She's just really accomplished. So, Amita, do you mind just giving the listeners and viewers a brief intro into who you are and what you're doing today?
Thank you, Joseph. That's a very prolific introduction. So I have been in the field of data analytics and data science right from the beginning of my career. I was born and raised in India, and then I obtained a master's degree in statistics and started working in financial services as a data scientist, which was called an econometrician back then. And then I very soon moved into management consulting and went to the US, spending a few years with Accenture. And I moved to London to do my MBA for 2 years, and I've been here since then. And right across the board, I have covered many sectors, including financial services, consumer retail, TMT, energy, etc., and seeing data analytics grow and evolve from the days of SAS to Python and R and machine learning and artificial intelligence of late. So that's my area of interest right now, is intelligent automation, cloud engineering, and artificial intelligence. And I'm glad that we're talking about it today. I'm really looking forward to this series of podcasts.
Yeah, fantastic. And thanks for that intro. And you obviously mentioned intelligent automation towards the end. And you have been in data from the very beginning,
Right.
How did you initially kind of venture into the data? And part of what we're going to be speaking about today is obviously career in data and some myth busters around it, and also, artificial intelligence itself. So do you mind just giving us insight into how you even got into data in the first place?
Well, it wasn't so much by design as it was by default, because I studied statistics. And at that time, people were looking for students with a background in statistics who knew mathematics and could build statistical models. I didn't have much of a background in computer science, so I had to actually learn it on the job. So I learned coding on the job. And I found my way into the corporate sector using those sort of skills, because at that time, the hiring within corporate sectors for general stream graduates, such as myself, I did economics and statistics, was mostly in the field of data analytics if you were lucky enough to be top of the pile, really. So a lot of it depended on your grades. And I got in there and I got into risk management, fraud risk management, and then credit risk management. Somehow in my gut, I felt that this was going to go big. But really, I had no way of knowing how big it was going to be. So it was by default. But I also had a deep interest in coding, in numbers, in what sort of stories numbers tell. So that's how I kept going, and now it's been more than 15 years.
Yeah, and it's really interesting to see how the field has evolved and changed. And I guess I believe it was maybe last year, but a data scientist role was actually one of the most popular roles in many surveys, But would you say, and we'll get into this a little bit further, but what are some of the kind of myths around careers in data from your perspective, Amita?
You're right. I mean, I was reading the Harvard Business Review the other day, and it said that the sexiest job today is that of a data scientist. And there are a lot of myths around it. I think one of the most common ones is that if you don't study mathematics, if you're not a graduate from certain subjects, if you're not a PhD, you cannot join these fields. Now, don't mean to take names, but some of the most accomplished people in this field of data science, including chief data officers of certain very big consumer retail companies, are actually from an arts background. Like they have studied history, and people I work with today in my area of consulting partners that I work with are also from the arts background. It's just, I think you have to have the interest to understand what story the data is telling you. So myth number one is that you have to study engineering, you have to study computer science, you have to have a PhD. No, you just have to have a mind that is trained to think logically and an interest in learning new things that you probably have not covered in your coursework. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that if you're going to do data science, and this is going to be your bread and butter for the rest of your life, and I would say that, technology is such a fast growing area that what is in vogue today may not be in vogue tomorrow. So I do believe that data science will branch out and evolve in different ways. So you have to constantly keep learning. There is no such thing as I have done this today and this is going to carry me throughout my life. So like any other profession, you have to evolve.
Yeah, and you mentioned a really interesting point there, and I've had conversations about this point with data leaders as well who actually come from the arts and have actually forged a really strong career in data science. And you mentioned, some elements that people from a non-traditional background can dive into to have a career here, such as, being curious about data. What are some other ways that, people perhaps coming from an arts background can really get into the data field and make a long-term success of it?
So as I said, the competition is really tough, as you can understand, and people do look for those traditional degrees. But self-learning is never to be underestimated. And we live in a world right now where there's so many free tools and training that are available, whether it's Udacity or Coursera. So if you have an interest, go and find out what the different aspects of data science are, because they're quite a wide variety. Go and find out what captures your interest. Take your time to enroll for a free course. So some of them are really, really inexpensive, like maybe for £10. Do a few courses and figure out what is it that holds your interest. What is it that your mind adapts very quickly to? And at the same time, I would also encourage people to watch podcasts like this, or, go on to YouTube or go on to TED Talks and get to know more and more about different aspects of data. Because today, even in a traditional strategy consulting firm, decisions are not made without data, because the clients don't want to just put a finger up in the air conclusion to anything. So it doesn't have to be building models. It could be things like finance transformation or understanding how the market is evolving in terms of market economics, in terms of market forecasting. Or it could be something very close to my heart, like credit risk management, or doing consumer retail, B2C marketing analytics. So there's a wide variety. Find out what you're interested in, what captures your interest, what is it that attracts you. And there's so many ways to do that today without investing your money. You just have to invest your time.
Yeah, and it really starts with you. It starts with your appetite to do that. So
sure.
That's really great advice. And you obviously mentioned a very factual point that, even strategy firms aren't making decisions without data. You've had a long career in consulting, a successful one. What's your view on, specialist versus generalist as it relates to one's focus on a specific strand of data science or data analytics? Should people specialize? Should they be more generalist across data, or a mixture? What's your view on that?
So I'm a generalist because I have a bit of a unique combination. You do a master's in economics and statistics, and then you do an MBA in finance strategy and private equity. So you get to see different aspects of the business world. And you combine it with some very academic approach and knowledge. So I have always been a generalist going cross-sector, but at the same time, I like to have an in-depth understanding of what is going on. So if somebody builds a model and shows it to me, I'm able to understand and evaluate what it's doing. I'm sometimes even able to guide and advise on how to improve it or make it more adaptable to the real world. But you need both categories. So I have data scientists and data engineers who have worked for me, who are fantastic in their field, and they specialize in certain things. And you need those special skills to develop and to advance in certain niche areas. For example, 5 years back, I was part of the largest customer experience strategy project going on in the world. And we were building a big data ecosystem out of nothing. And we required specialists because very few people had done that all over the world. When I say done that, not just in the UK or Ireland or EU, in the world, very few people had built that sort of an ecosystem. So we needed specialists. But we also needed generalists such as myself who could give that overview and talk to the business and talk to the data scientists and talk to the data engineers and put it all together for them. So it really depends on what interests you, what kind of skill sets you have. There's a need for both in our world today.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like interesting because there is definitely a need for both. But as you have grown in seniority in your career, how has your role evolved, especially in consulting, where sometimes there's sales elements, there's sales targets and stuff. How have you managed that change and in your own career?
So it is tricky in consulting because every project can be different. And it's a question of timing. Sometimes you have to do projects that are not really clearly aligned to your area of interest. And sometimes in the past, when I was younger, I regretted doing those projects. But now they're paying off because there are different aspects, say data governance or data modeling, that I was forced to understand back then, which turn out to be very crucial right now. And I think the way it has evolved is my mindset has always been to find a solution. And if you want to find a solution, then you don't really have to split your head between actually finding the solution or making a proposal or putting in a sales pitch. If you find a gap in the market, if you find that there are problems that the clients are trying to solve and you know the solution, you can design the solution with the help of your team and you can present it to them. Then the other aspect that you need to learn is how to commercialize it, how to make it a sustainable, revenue generating solution that you can sell to multiple clients. But I think the first and foremost thing is to understand where the problems lie, what are the pockets that need to be addressed, and then how can you address them through data science, through data analytics, through technology. So that's how it has evolved, really. First, sitting in a corner and building models, and then going on to understand how that model actually solves a business problem, then getting bigger and understanding what is the bigger business problem. I hate to use cliched terms, but the big picture is really important. And then understanding what in the market is important and how do you address that need and how do you commercialize it. So that's how it's evolved, really. I don't think that we can ever say that a consulting person is an only sales-oriented person. It's always somebody who is trying to find what the solution is. And that's how you go on from one technology to another, from one solution to the other, and you innovate.
Yeah, 100%. And it's such an important point, Anita, especially in today's market. Like a lot of my clients are consulting firms, and one of the cool things that they ask when looking for talent is, okay, we ideally want someone who has a bit of a split, a dual skill set, if you will. So half technical, but equally commercial, business, strong from a business acumen standpoint as well. And obviously you've taken an MBA, but other people who may not necessarily have an MBA can still have that business awareness and that commercial savvy, especially as you grow in seniority, you're going to need it, right?
Absolutely. And I think you don't really have to go back to the classroom in every case. And it's not also possible for everyone. Everyone doesn't get that opportunity. People don't have that bandwidth in their lives, whether it is putting in that time or putting in that money for a very high tuition fee. So you can always learn on the job. And I think that's very crucial because that also tells you where your interests lie. If you're spending time learning about something, that means it excites you and that's your path.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess if we switch gears here a little bit, one topic that you're passionate about, I'm passionate about as well, is, diversity and inclusion, specifically, women in data and women in leadership positions in data, So as you have obviously built a career and built your way into a leadership position in data, what are some of the, I guess, things that you see that can perhaps be improved by larger organizations as it relates to, putting women in a position of power and leadership in the data space?
There's obviously a lot that I can say about that, because it is a topic, as you pointed out, that I'm very passionate about. And I'm going to start by saying that the largest corporations in the world are making a lot of effort to ensure that diversity and inclusion is on the top of their list of priorities. But there's a lot more to be done. There's a lot more to be achieved. And when it comes to having women in leadership positions, especially in consulting, and this was quite evident when I was working in the US, that after the manager grade, women start falling out of the ranks because, they find that having that work-life balance is difficult, or they don't feel that they're well equipped to go ahead. So when people say that we should have more and more women in leadership positions on the board, the first thing I say is that you can't be what you can't see. So if you have more and more examples of people who are actually doing it, whether it is managing their home and going to work, or whether it is actually following their passion, if you have more people as examples, then that will encourage a lot of people. The second thing is there are very specific situations that I have experienced in my career where younger girls, who are more new to their job, more new to the organization, have had problems that they couldn't speak up about because all the people they were working with, the leaders, were all male leaders. And not that they were not listening or not keen to listen, but there's just this barrier, this gap that they didn't cross over. If there were other women in those leadership positions, then they would have just come over and had a chat, and it would have resolved problems. So they just leave. It just annoys me to think that people leave because they just didn't have the right person to talk to. The third thing that is very important is there are certain issues like gender pay gap. It is important to women. It is also important to men. I'm not saying that it's a bias, but the more women you have in those positions where you can influence and take those decisions, the easier the path is going to be in closing those gaps. So for me, diversity is very important. The last thing I would like to say at this point is I'm not advocating that put women in positions where they're not capable of doing the role. That's not fair, because I'm not advocating that you have quotas for women. What I'm advocating is that women have different needs and different ways to develop their potential. One must pay attention to that and provide an environment where they can grow and they can get into those roles by virtue of their own merit. That's all I seek when it comes to diversity.
Yeah, that's a fantastic point. And I mean, wow, you could dive into this topic so deep, and we will dive into it a little bit further. One of the things that I wanted to say about this as well is that, as you touch on environment there, Amita, and I think because diversity and inclusion and women in leadership positions is very much in vogue, but when clients come to me and they ask for a diverse shortlist, and I always provide diverse shortlists anyway, but one of my core questions to them is, okay, you want women in leadership positions in your organization, but what does the environment look like? Does that environment allow them to grow? Does that environment provide a understanding nature to the issues that they face? And also, are there other examples of women in leadership in your organization as well? And I think those are all key points. And in your experience, what have you seen as it relates to, initiatives or environments that have been successful in promoting women, especially in the data space or technology?
So one of the key things is mentoring. And we have a very successful program in my current organization, which is a Big Four consulting firm, which focuses on just mentoring and nurturing women. And this doesn't have to be just within an organization. I mean, there are other areas where women in data get together and then they pair you with the right mentors, because you have to have a mentor who's not in your direct environment, with whom you can have conversations that are happening in a safe place. And these have to be other women who have already walked the path that you wish to walk on. So mentoring is a fantastic thing. And then you have to have open forums where women are encouraged to come up and speak about what they want to do, what challenges they're facing, and how they should face them. I think openness is very important. If things are not working, then you just raise your hand, and you should have that environment where you can openly say that, look, this is not working. Unfortunately, a lot of the things that people say in terms of diversity in some crucial stages are only existing in theory. So if there's a report that needs to be made on diversity, people just focus on making that report. But it's the practice that one should focus on. And if you're not doing it in practice, it's going to harm your organization. And if you look at one of the interviews I saw last year, Christine Lagarde, she said that it is now proven that the more women you include in your organization, the more value it brings, the more competitive your organization becomes because of the diversity of thought, approach, and of concern that women bring to the table. So if you really want your organization to improve, to retain talent, especially talent when it comes to younger women, to be able to bring a diversity of opinion, thoughts, and therefore ideas to the board, you need to do this in practice rather than just in theory.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, action moves us forward. You mentioned I still have a long way to go as a relates to diversity and women in leadership, but action. And also, we need more male leaders speaking about this as well. It's okay and fine for females to be banging the drum, if you will, but everybody needs to bang the drum.
Yeah.
So that's a really good point. And another topic that, we wanted to discuss, and I believe is obviously quite a hot topic as well, is automation and artificial intelligence. And one of the areas, that we're seeing a lot of potential for their automation is actually contract management. What's your experience, perspective on, how AI and automation can essentially help in contract management, especially in the current climate that we find ourselves in?
So using AI to contract management has been very important in the recent past. Well, one of the things that I saw was when LIBOR changes came in, LIBOR is going to be substituted. It's been a big deal last year. And a lot of companies have come forward saying that we have these tens of thousands of documents and we don't know what to do with them because we don't have the time to manually read them and incorporate those changes in LIBOR. We just have to figure out a way to automate this. So that's where I saw the need evolving. And now it's going to become even bigger because I believe there are about 776 or 78 treaties that need to be renegotiated because of Brexit. And no one is going to sit around and read all those contracts. So contract management is, first of all, very important because we have changing regulatory conditions. We have changing political conditions. We have changing economic negotiations between countries, between companies. We have a different stress on ESG that we have not had before, which requires one to come up with a lot of data and a lot of understanding of different contracts that are binding various companies. So that's one thing. You don't have the time and you cannot possibly manually read it. The second aspect of contract management is also it's diverting from a little bit from the word contract. It could be things like invoice leakage, which means, you have invoices, you have timesheets, you have people billing their time, you have different aspects that are coming into your procure to pay or your payment systems. How do you then get it all together and you mash them against each other to make sure that there is no invoice leakage? There are no leakages happening. It doesn't always have to be a case of initiated fraud. It could also be a case of just mismanagement. And the third aspect, following on from there, is obviously fraud, where people find loopholes and then they actually exploit the system. So I think contract management in the area of data science and artificial intelligence is going to just become increasingly more and more important. And I feel when you say artificial intelligence, a lot of people shrink and say, oh my God, I'm going to lose my job if that happens. The fact is that it's not aimed at people losing their jobs. What it aims for is specialization in terms of doing things that were, say, it's being done manually, could have been open to a lot of errors. What it essentially means is let's take away the things that a machine can do, very simply put, and let's give the humans a bigger opportunity to use imagination and intuitiveness, which are essentially human qualities, and apply them by reskilling. A lot of times people ask me, do you think AI is ever going to take over humans? And I always say that, human intelligence and human imagination cannot be matched as far as I can see. Maybe I'll be proven wrong 50 years down the line, but this is how I think now. And we must use those two aspects more often than just doing something that a machine can be made to do. So I think it's not a question of losing jobs. It's a question of upskilling and reskilling that comes into play with AI.
Definitely. And those points that you mentioned, especially around, will AI take my job? That's a question that's regularly asked. And like you say, it's much more about, AI essentially making humans more efficient in doing things that, machines can't do. So like you said, they can focus on being more creative. They can focus on the human element. They can focus on, things like being empathetic in those situations. A machine can't do that, and a fantastic use case that you used as well, just as it relates to, Brexit and all of these treaties. And we're even seeing, like coronavirus loan fraud as well that's happening. So these are all areas where essentially automation and artificial intelligence can be very useful. And I guess, how would you, potentially mobilize the workforce or those people who haven't necessarily put the skills and technical awareness to work alongside artificial intelligence yet? How would you kind of advise going about that reskilling process for teams and organizations?
I think it's a big responsibility for organizations to make sure that people are constantly being upgraded, because that's how the organization upgrades itself. So when we go into that area of reskilling, the first question that we face is a cultural resistance. How are we going to overcome cultural resistance? So it's a huge change management piece, which involves actually taking on the culture that has prevailed all this time. And people are mostly very suspicious of change. So I think it requires a lot of investments into getting to know people and empathizing and actually clarifying what is going to happen, and be 100% transparent and saying that these are the options and this is how it's going to be beneficial for you. Because individuals tend to think more about themselves than the organization. And once you get that message across, then you basically have tapped into their own area of self-interest, which is important if one wants to improve oneself. So that's when you can actually bring in change. I think change is not about, doing a mass training or a mass adoption program. It's about focusing on every individual and trying to understand how they are going to benefit from this change.
That's an excellent perspective to have on it, Amita, and one that I think is sometimes overlooked, the change management aspect of reskilling or of implementing a more data-driven culture. What have you. So thanks for making that point. And as we kind of wrap up here, last two questions that I always like to get out of them, 2021 year, what are some of the things in data that you're most excited about this year and the kind of medium term?
So the first thing that I'm very interested in, and I think everyone is to understand how we can possibly tackle the whole pandemic in terms of vaccinating people quickly. And data is doing a great job there. I mean, people don't know, but today, even when the government looks at how the vaccine is going to be distributed, there's analysis of geospatial data, there's analysis of different kinds of supply chain data. A lot of data work is happening in the background. And I think I'm very excited to say that, now we can proudly say that we directly impact the benefit of humanity when it comes to doing all the data work that we do. So what I want to see is in life sciences, I want to see a different approach in terms of how we use data for clinical trials and how we use data to understand different challenges that we have had in the field of medicine and biochemistry. And life sciences is the one area which I've always been interested in, not worked in terms of data. So personally, that's one thing that I would like to do this year. The second thing is in terms of economics and how it's being driven, how the economy is being driven by this current challenge. I want there to be a lot of transparency in terms of how people understand what the government is spending, how it's trickling down to them, etc. And when you say that, how's data going to help? It's all about numbers. So I don't think the common man really understands those numbers, and there would be a lot of barriers and suspicion and lack of trust that would be crossed if people were educated and made to understand those numbers. So those are the two key things that I'm looking at, maybe not professionally, but as a person in the field of data and analytics.
Really exciting times, and I too, have seen the power of data in kind of helping us come out of the pandemic, or try to come out of the pandemic. And there's a lot around, the supply chain as well, as you mentioned. So I'm as excited about those areas, Amita. And lastly, you've had a very long career in consulting and in data. What's the one or two of the best pieces of advice that you've had to help you kind of navigate your career and get into a leadership position yourself?
The first thing is people might really feel that this is the happening thing or this is what has a future. But I think it's important to find out what your interest is, because you're not going to survive in a field that you're truly not interested in. And if you're truly interested in what you do, you'll get better at it. And I know a lot of people think that we'll just follow the money and we'll just do what seems to be commercially feasible. But it doesn't. In my opinion, it doesn't really last very long. You'll get exhausted if you keep doing something that you don't like. So the first thing in any field in life is just find what ignites your passion. And the second thing in any field, not just data and analytics and consulting, is once you find that out, have resilience. Because to be honest, it's not doing something that's very hard. We're not doing something that's very, very hard. That's a myth. We're not doing rocket science every day that it's hard. It's just a question of sticking to it and finding solutions and learning different things. So it's resilience at the end of the day. It's not how smart you are, what your IQ is, or even how charming you are. It's all about resilience. So if you have resilience, if you have the desire, you'll figure it out yourself.
Yeah, fantastic. And resilience, especially in this pandemic, is something that a lot of people will need, and will really appreciate your time in this conversation.
Well, thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And I'm glad that we got to do this, despite the pandemic and despite lockdown and stuff like that. So appreciate your time. I'm sure the listeners got a lot of value, as I did. So thank you for your time, and I look forward to catching up.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Joseph. It's been really nice speaking to you, and I look forward to the other episodes of the podcast as well. And here's hoping everyone stays safe, stays well, and we'll soon find a way out of this pandemic.
Thanks, Amita.